Hey everyone, this is Uri Peleg for Guerrilla Poker. In this video I'm gonna take you guys through a high stakes hand and look at the PioSOLVER analysis of it. And whenever we look at solver analysis of hands, there are always a ton of unintuitive things going on, so I'm gonna try to explain some of them and we'll try to figure out which are applicable and useful in your games and which are more like solver science fiction. So this hand is going to be played by 4-6-4 in O-Spiel. We see a cutoff raise, button 3-bet, cutoff calls, and we see a king, queen, deuce, two-tone flop, check, small bet, raise, and a call. So first thing I want to show you guys, for those who don't know these things, they might find them interesting, quickly go through the ranges. These ranges were calculated with Poker Star Zoom 500 rake. Generally, when the rake structure changes, the ranges will change a little bit. The 3-betting range looks like this. So we have these premium hands always there, jacks plus, ace king offsuit, ace queen suited, and then all the kind of good stuff around them, whether it's pocket pairs, suited aces, offsuit stuff, is mixed, like sometimes calling, sometimes 3-betting. The defense range for the out of position player is missing the premiums, but then it's similar types of hands, pocket pairs, suited connectors, suited broadways, with the better ones being overly represented than compared to the worse ones. So more nines than deuces, more ace jack suited than ace nine suited. And there's a tiny bit of offsuit stuff. These hands get in there more when the rake gets lower or the sizings get smaller. Let's take a look at the sim. So we have king, queen, deuce, two-tone, out of position is forced to always check. At this point, when you first look at the sim, I find it useful to click this equity button. This shows us a big picture view of what's going on. And we see that the in-position player, the 3-better, has a big equity advantage on king, queen, deuce, two-tone. And the big equity advantages often result in high-frequency c-bet strategies, which is what we see here, with a small size betting every single time. So pretty much betting every hand in his range, whether it's 2-pair or 4s. Out of position player is going to respond again. The response, the fact that he's folding so much, is connected to his low equity on the board. If he had a higher equity, you'd often see the fold amount drop. The check raise node, it's based around deuces and king queen for value, and we can see the response of the in position player obviously is going to call ace queen, and here most people would move to the turn, but I always like to look at everything that's going on and make sure it makes sense. And here there was something where when I looked at the sim didn't make sense to me. And that's that queen jack suited was folding. But then pocket tens was calling. And I think this is a really weird unintuitive effect. I would hazard to say, you guys can tell me if you agree with this or not, that in a real world environment, the guys you're playing against would always fold tens and always call queen jack, and they wouldn't consider any of those decisions close. So seeing the solver do the opposite makes me curious, first of all, why? And second, how much can I trust the rest of the conclusions that are going to be here, given these hands are now either not in the range or yes in the range? And the answer is not as much as you might think. When you look at the check raising range, like we said, it's based around king, queen, and deuces. That means that queen jack is pretty much drawing dead. If you improve on a queen, you're still losing. And if you improve on a jack, you're still losing. So the hand can't really improve. Look at tens, on the other hand, specifically tens with a spade. On any 10 that comes, you're beating deuces, you're beating king, queen, and there's no flush because you're holding the 10 of spades. So this hand is actually drawing to something pretty nutty, and you can see this in Equilab, where versus king, queen, deuces, tens has 15% equity, while something like queen jack of hearts would have 5% equity. So I think this is a useful thing that we can learn from the solver, where we're used to queen jack being good, but when we're facing very polarized ranges, very tight ranges, Sometimes a pocket pair can have higher value than something like middle pair, and who knows, maybe higher value than something like top pair. So on the turn 10 of clubs, 4-6-4 bets half pot-sized bet, and Oshpiel decides to call. Tough decision for Oshpiel. I think even though he has a pair and a gut shot, the pair is not going to be very good. The gut shot is to a 4 straight, which makes it very visible and not as valuable as normal gut shots. And he's going to have a lot of hands like ace queen, ace king, aces, so tough decision with those at this point. And look at the turn, and whenever I look at turns, if you hit Control H on the solver, you get this again bird's eye view window where we can click on out of position EV and see which turn cards are better or worse for him, and this is always going to be connected to the strategy. So rather than looking at the strategy for this specific turn, we want to know what are the good turns and the bad turns, and we're generally going to be more aggressive on the good turns and more defensive on the bad turns. So here we see that board pairing like a deuce or a king is pretty bad for the out of position player. Queen not as much, which is something you need to ask yourselves about. I think it has to do with ace queen and queen jack, queen 10 getting check raised sometimes. Draws coming in, so the flush coming in, or a 9. Are really good for the out of position player, and yeah, when we click these, you can see on a 9 a 63% betting frequency, on a spade 100% betting frequency, so some of these cards are super good. On a deuce, which is the worst card, everything checks, so this map is really useful for understanding what's going on. But there's also something a bit odd here, because king queen deuce 3 through 8 are bricks. But there are EV differences between them. On a 3 there's 40% betting, on a 6 there's 30% betting, but the cards seem identical. So it's important again to understand what's going on here, so we know how much we can trust what's happening here. So when we look at again the out of position range, guys can see these small amounts of 3s, 4s, and 5s. These hands check raised on the flop in solver land. And if they're in the range, obviously a 3, 4, or 5 falling would be a lot better than a 6, 7, or 8 falling. But is this a real effect? I would have to say no. I think in a real world setting, people are not more likely to check raise 3s than 7s, and actually they're probably raising neither of those hands. So this is kind of a fake effect, and the entire strategy, like I said, in a lot of these spots becomes suspect. But we can still learn some things from this. We could ask ourselves the question, well, why are 3s, 4s, and 5s raising over 6, 7s, and 8s? 6s is folding and 3s is raising, and 6s is a better hand than 3s. So there has to be a reason for this. Whenever you're looking for reasons and they're not immediately evident, you should look in other branches of the game tree. So not the range, but the range before it or the range after it. And when we check raise, it's very apparent that the in-position player is going to fold hands like 8, 7s, and 6s, but he's not going to have 5s, 4s, and 3s as often to begin with, because he 3-bets more of the high pairs. So by holding 3s, due to removal effects, you actually get more folds than you would get by check raising 6s. And this is going to be a real significant effect, and it's something that comes up across multiple solver sims, where when you're bluffing, you want to have a good interaction with villain's folding range. So I tend to say this is a real effect, and there's a very decent chance this will come up across multiple sims of 3-bet pots, where a hand like 3s or 4s is going to be a nice check raise bluff, while a hand like 6s or 7s is going to fold. This is not unique to this spot. Okay, let's go back to the actual turn. So when we look at the 10 of clubs, first question I always have is what to do when I turn a pair like a 10-9 of spades, or a jack 10, or an ace 10. because I have a draw and I have a pair, and I'm not sure whether or not to bet it. And here we see that the solver likes always betting, which is good to know. And is of course connected to how good or bad the card is for you. Where if, like we said, the deuce of diamonds would come, we wouldn't even bet with jack 10, no matter having a pair. But yeah, 10 of clubs, so we're betting all these pairs. And the in-position player is faced with his tough decision. Here we see ace-queen actually always folding, including ace-queen with a heart. And ace-king is doing some suit magic. So some suits are calling and some suits are folding. If you click on this EV button, we get to see the dollar value. So ace-king with the ace of spades is always folding. I think this is very easy to understand. You want the other guy to hold the ace of spades so that he can be bluffing with his nut flush draw. When you have the ace of spades, his range is going to be a lot more value heavy. So these make sense. But what's the difference between having the king of diamonds or king of clubs or king of hearts? It looks like king of diamonds is significantly worse than club or heart. So to understand this again, we want to look at the betting range. And when you look at the betting range, because king-queen offsuit is underrepresented, the main two-pair hands are going to be king-queen suited. And that means with a spade and a diamond on the board, we're talking about king-queen of hearts and king-queen of clubs. So seeing this, I think again it becomes very clear. Having the king of hearts and having the king of clubs is going to remove one of these value combos. Having the king of diamonds isn't. So there's going to be a real preference, and this is something that you can take away and actually use in game. If you think the other guy's range is more suited heavy, there are going to be preferences as far as suits. And pretty big ones as far as the EV of the hand. Okay, so called, rivers, a 7 of diamonds brick, 4-6-4 shoves. And Oshpil's again faced with a tough bluff catching decision, but maybe one that we can judge a bit more easily now that we've talked about suits previously. Where here queen of hearts we know is a good queen to have, much better than something like the queen of spades. And let's look at what PioSolver has to say. Rivers are generally the easiest streets, there's the least weird stuff going on. So out of position shoves, and we can see that even though ace queen of hearts should have folded the turn, if you get to the river with it, it's always calling. And we also see the same suit effects as before with ace king, where if you have a club or a heart, it's a fist pump call, while a diamond is just a fold. So we finished going over the hand. I guess I forgot to show the results. So Oshpil calls and loses to 2-pair, king queen offsuit. If you were to judge this naively by PioSolver, you'd say that both players played fine and Oshpil made a loose turn call. You could also take it a step further and say he called a hand class that should be always folding. Maybe he's a bit stationy, and maybe this is going to apply to other hands he plays. But throughout the hand, I think we've seen pretty convincingly that there are a bunch of weird effects going on that are probably not going to happen in-game. And I think it's not fair to judge how good or bad a play is by the solver output. And I'm going to show you guys a different way to do that. So on the turn 10 of clubs, I think the betting range for the out of position player is not very realistic. I don't think threes is even going to be in the range, let alone bet. And I think hands like jack 10 or 10-9 of spades or ace 10 are going to be betting, but not every single time. Same for something like ace queen offsuit. I think that's probably just going to check if it gets here. So in PioSolver we have the option to make a custom strategy and see the response. I click set strategy and lock node. I get this window, and here I get to set the strategy for the out of position player to something that I think is more representative of what will actually happen. So I'm going to remove all these pocket pairs from betting. I'm gonna remove ace-queen offsuit, which I think might get here, but will probably not bet. And I'm gonna take hands like Jack 10, Queen Jack, and Ace 10 with no spade, and make them bet less frequently. If I were now to look at the EV for the in-position player immediately, we would see that Ace Queen of Hearts is now a very big mistake as a call, and even something like Ace King, which before was calling, is now also a big mistake as a call. Move up to aces, and you see that aces with a spade is going to be a huge mistake calling, while with no spade is pretty close. So in my opinion, this is a lot more representative of what's going to be going on in the games I play, and probably in the games that you play. And it's a good example of how we can use the solver to learn about spots, to learn about useful things like preferred suits, pocket pairs, how to construct bluffing ranges, how to play hands in various spots. But in the end, we have to make a reality check, and this tool is also very useful for looking at real-world situations, constructing betting ranges and just seeing the response, and in this case, the response is just going to be folding a lot. By my standards, Oshpil made a very big turn mistake, not a small one like the solver, and I think versus most opponents, even high-stakes players, has a very clear fold there. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned a little bit about all the solver magic and science fiction stuff. And if you liked it and want to see more, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. See you next time.